Ben Solo never falls. Kylo Ren never exists. Starkiller Base is never built. The sequel trilogy as we know it, it never happens. One single change. One prevented corruption. And suddenly billions of people who died are still alive. The Skywalker family stays whole. Luke never goes into exile. Han never dies on that bridge. Rey remains a nobody on Jakku, never discovering she's a Palpatine. Finn is never stolen as a child, never becomes a stormtrooper. The entire galaxy shifts on a completely different axis. This isn't just removing a villain from the story. This is erasing the entire foundation of 30 years of galactic history. The question isn't just what happens without the First Order. The question is, who are we without the wars that define us? Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will completely change how you see the sequel trilogy. Every hero you know, every sacrifice, every dramatic moment, none of it happens. And somehow that's both beautiful and terrifying. Imagine watching your son sleep and feeling the darkness in him. In the original timeline, Luke Skywalker ignited his lightsaber for just a split second, considering killing Ben Solo to prevent the darkness he sensed. That moment, that single moment of weakness, destroyed everything. Ben woke up, saw his uncle standing over him with a weapon, and the betrayal pushed him straight into Snoke's arms. But what if that moment never happened? What if someone killed Snoke first? What if Ben Solo, the most powerful Force-sensitive of his generation, never heard the whispers in the dark? Everything changes. And I mean everything. To understand what we're erasing, we first need to understand what the First Order actually was. Born from the ashes of the Galactic Empire after the Battle of Jakku, the First Order wasn't just another Imperial remnant clinging to past glories. It was a carefully orchestrated resurgence, a phoenix rising from what everyone assumed were dead embers. While the New Republic celebrated victory and began the long process of demilitarization and galactic healing, something sinister was brewing in the unknown regions of space. Imperial officers, Sith cultists, and true believers in the Empire's authoritarian vision fled to these uncharted territories, taking with them stolen resources, technology, and most importantly, an unshakable conviction that the Empire's fall was merely a temporary setback. Under the mysterious guidance of Supreme Leader Snoke, a being whose origins remained shrouded in darkness, these Imperial remnants transformed into something new. They adopted the aesthetics of the old Empire but refined them, made them sharper, more brutal, more efficient. Their stormtroopers were kidnapped children, brainwashed from birth into perfect soldiers. Their star destroyers dwarfed even the Imperial-class vessels that had terrorized the galaxy decades before, and their superweapon, Starkiller Base, made the Death Star look like a child's toy. Built into an entire planet and capable of destroying multiple star systems simultaneously across vast distances, it represented the culmination of Imperial weapons development philosophy. Intimidation through overwhelming destructive capability. But the First Order's most valuable asset wasn't technological. It was personal. Through manipulation, lies, and exploiting the vulnerabilities of a troubled young man, Snoke succeeded in turning Ben Solo, son of Han and Leia, nephew of Luke Skywalker, to the dark side. This wasn't just a symbolic victory. This was a strategic masterstroke. By corrupting the Skywalker bloodline, by transforming the next generation's greatest hope into Kylo Ren, the First Order gained not just a powerful dark-side warrior, but also dealt a psychological blow to the very heroes who had defeated the Empire. Luke went into exile, broken by his failure. Han returned to smuggling, unable to face his loss. Leia watched her family disintegrate while trying desperately to warn a complacent New Republic of the growing threat they refused to acknowledge. The First Order's rise culminated in catastrophe. They emerged from the unknown regions not with a gradual conquest, but with a devastating first strike. Starkiller Base destroyed the entire Hosnian system, the current seat of the New Republic's government. In one horrific moment, the Galactic Senate, the heart of democracy, billions of civilians, and a significant portion of the New Republic's defensive fleet were simply erased from existence. The galaxy was left reeling, leaderless, and vulnerable. Into this power vacuum, the First Order swept like a tidal wave, conquering system after system as a desperate resistance fought what seemed like an unwinnable guerrilla war against impossible odds. This is what we're erasing. So where does this alternate timeline diverge? When does the First Order's rise get stopped before it even begins? There are several potential points of divergence, but let's focus on the most impactful one. The corruption of Ben Solo never happens. Perhaps Snoke is discovered and eliminated by Luke Skywalker or New Republic intelligence before he can sink his claws into a vulnerable young man. Perhaps Ben's training goes differently, and Luke's moment of weakness, that split second where he considered striking down his sleeping nephew, never occurs. Perhaps Han and Leia's marriage remains stronger, providing Ben with the emotional stability he needed during his turbulent adolescence. Or maybe, in this timeline, Snoke simply never existed at all. Without this mysterious dark side entity orchestrating events from the shadows, the scattered Imperial remnants remain exactly that: scattered, disorganized, and ultimately harmless. Let's assume the divergence point is this: Snoke is killed or neutralized before he can touch Ben Solo. The year is approximately 15 ABY, about 15 years after the Battle of Endor. Young Ben Solo is just beginning his Force training, showing immense potential but also struggling with the darkness that whispers in his blood, the legacy of his grandfather Darth Vader. In the Prime timeline, this is when Snoke would begin his psychological manipulation, reaching out through the Force, exploiting Ben's insecurities, amplifying his anger and confusion. But in our alternate timeline, something changes. Perhaps Luke, more vigilant and less trusting than in the original timeline, senses this outside influence and investigates. Perhaps he discovers Snoke's location in the unknown regions and, together with New Republic forces, eliminates this threat before it can metastasize. With Snoke gone, the Imperial remnants in the unknown regions lose their unifying leader. Without his dark side powers to enforce loyalty and his strategic vision to guide them, these fragments of the old empire begin to squabble among themselves. Ambitious officers vie for control. Resources are wasted on internal power struggles. Some factions even abandon the Imperial cause entirely, becoming pirates or mercenaries. A few attempt to return to known space and negotiate amnesty with the New Republic. Within a decade, what might have become the First Order instead becomes a dozen minor criminal organizations and failed military juntas, none possessing the strength or unity to threaten galactic peace. The New Republic, while maintaining reasonable defensive vigilance, never faces the existential threat that would have destroyed it. But the most immediate and profound change is personal. Ben Solo never falls to the dark side. He never becomes Kylo Ren. Let's explore what this means for him and for everyone connected to him. Ben's training under Luke Skywalker continues, difficult and challenging, but ultimately successful. Luke, no longer burdened by the prophetic visions that would have driven him to that fateful moment of considering killing his nephew, proves to be a patient and understanding teacher. He recognizes the darkness Ben struggles with, the legacy of Darth Vader that whispers in the young man's mind, but instead of fearing it, Luke teaches Ben to acknowledge these feelings without being controlled by them. He shares his own experiences with anger and temptation, how he nearly fell to the dark side when facing his father, how he chose compassion over hatred at the crucial moment. Ben grows into a powerful Jedi, but not an arrogant one. His struggles with the dark side make him empathetic to others facing similar battles. He becomes known for his ability to reach troubled students, to guide those who feel the pull of anger and fear back toward the light. In many ways, he becomes the Jedi that Anakin Skywalker could have been, if not for Palpatine's manipulation. He's passionate but controlled, powerful but humble, connected to both sides of his family's legacy while being enslaved by neither. The famous Skywalker temper is still there, but channeled into determination and righteous purpose rather than destructive rage. Luke's Jedi Academy flourishes in this timeline. Without the trauma of Ben's fall and the subsequent destruction of his temple, Luke successfully trains a new generation of Jedi Knights. By the time we reach the era when the sequel trilogy would have taken place, there are dozens of trained Jedi spread across the galaxy. They're not warriors primarily. Luke learned from the mistakes of the old Jedi Order. These new Jedi are counselors, peacekeepers, investigators, and healers. They work alongside New Republic institutions rather than operating as a separate entity. They marry, have families, and maintain connections to the wider galaxy. They're encouraged to experience emotion but not be ruled by it, to form attachments but not become possessive. It's a more balanced, more human approach to wielding the Force. Ben Solo takes a particular interest in Jedi history and archaeology. He becomes fascinated with understanding how his grandfather fell and how the old Jedi Order failed. He writes treatises on the importance of acknowledging darkness without being consumed by it. texts that become foundational to this new Jedi philosophy. He forms a close bond with his uncle Luke, and together they explore ancient Jedi and Sith sites across the galaxy, seeking knowledge and ensuring that dangerous dark side artifacts don't fall into the wrong hands. His relationship with his parents, while still sometimes strained by the typical tensions between parents and adult children, never experiences the catastrophic break that would have occurred in the original timeline. Han Solo's life in this alternate timeline is dramatically different. In the original timeline, the loss of Ben to the dark side destroyed him. His marriage to Leia fell apart under the weight of grief and blame. He returned to the only life he knew before the rebellion, smuggling and running from commitment, trying to outrun the pain of failure as a father. But in this new timeline, Han gets to see his son grow into a man he can be proud of. Sure, Ben is a Jedi, wrapped up in mystical force business that Han doesn't entirely understand or trust, but he's a good man, a hero, someone who helps people. Han might not say it often because he's still Han Solo, and expressing emotions directly isn't his strong suit, but he's immensely proud. Han and Leia's marriage endures in this timeline. It's not perfect. Leia's commitment to the New Republic means long periods of separation. Han's restlessness and inability to stay in one place for too long creates friction. They argue, sometimes loudly, about politics, about parenting, about what they should do with their lives as they age. But the fundamental bond between them, forged during the rebellion and strengthened through raising a son together, remains intact. They work through their problems instead of letting grief tear them apart. Han becomes something he never thought he'd be, a family man. He still takes the Falcon out occasionally, still does some light freight hauling and the occasional semi-legal job, but he always comes home. As Han ages, he becomes involved in mentoring young pilots and smugglers who are trying to go legitimate. He works with New Republic Veteran Affairs, helping former rebels adjust to peacetime. He even, somewhat reluctantly, participates in historical documentaries about the rebellion. Though he insists that most of the heroic stories about him are exaggerated, Chewbacca remains by his side, of course, and together they become something of a living legend, the famous heroes of the rebellion who lived to enjoy the peace they fought for. Han Solo doesn't die at the hands of his corrupted son on a catwalk in a dark superweapon. Instead, he lives to see his grandchildren, to tell them embellished stories about the old days, to finally, truly find the home and family he'd been running from for so long. Leia Organa's trajectory changes just as dramatically. In the original timeline, watching her son fall to darkness while the New Republic ignored her warnings about the First Order pushed Leia out of conventional politics. She formed the Resistance, a paramilitary organization operating outside official channels, essentially becoming a general once again. She spent her later years fighting a desperate guerrilla war, watching friends die, resources dwindle, and hope fade. It was a return to the struggle of her youth, but without the optimism and certainty of ultimate victory that had sustained her during the rebellion. In our alternate timeline, Leia's political career flourishes. Without the First Order threat and with Ben safely training as a Jedi, she focuses entirely on building the New Republic into the just and effective government the galaxy needs. She becomes one of the most influential senators, known for her passionate advocacy for former Imperial worlds seeking integration into the Republic, for refugee populations, and for maintaining adequate defensive capabilities without slipping into militarism. She's a voice of experience and moral authority, someone who lived through the Empire's horrors and can speak to why the values of freedom and democracy must be actively protected. Leia never stops being a leader, but she gets to lead in peacetime rather than war. She champions legislation for economic development in the Outer Rim. She mediates disputes between member worlds. She builds coalitions and navigates the complex politics of a diverse galactic government. It's frustrating work, slower and more complicated than simply fighting an enemy you can shoot, but it's meaningful. She's building something rather than just fighting against something, and perhaps most importantly, she gets to watch her son grow up, to maintain a relationship with him, to not lose him to the darkness that claimed her father. Leia's force sensitivity, which in the original timeline manifested most dramatically in her survival in space and her communications with Ben, develops more fully in this alternate reality. With Luke's help and Ben's encouragement, she receives some basic training in her later years. She never becomes a Jedi Knight. She's too old and too committed to her political career for that kind of intensive training. But she learns to trust and use her instincts, to sense deception, to project calm and confidence through the Force during negotiations. She becomes known as an almost uncannily effective diplomat, someone who seems to always know what others are really thinking and feeling. It's a subtle use of her abilities, but powerful in its own way. Luke Skywalker's life in this alternate timeline might represent the most significant improvement in personal outcomes. In the original timeline, Luke's story became a tragedy. The legendary hero who redeemed Darth Vader, who rebuilt the Jedi Order, who represented hope for the entire galaxy, ended up as a broken hermit on a remote island, cut off from the Force, wallowing in failure and self-recrimination. He had allowed his fear to create the very monster he was afraid of, as his moment of weakness in considering killing Ben pushed his nephew toward the darkness. The weight of this failure crushed him, and he spent years hiding from the galaxy, convinced that the Jedi needed to end because they, and he specifically, had failed so catastrophically. In our new timeline, Luke never experiences this fall from grace. His academy succeeds. His students thrive. He gets to actually accomplish what he set out to do: restore the Jedi Order, but better, wiser, learning from the mistakes of the past. Luke becomes something unique in galactic history, a Jedi Master who lives to see his students train students of their own, who gets to refine and develop Jedi philosophy over decades of peace, who becomes to the new Jedi what Yoda was to the old order, but without the dogma and separation from the wider galaxy that ultimately doomed the old ways. Luke in this timeline is a happier, more fulfilled person. He still carries the weight of responsibility, still worries about his students and the future of the Jedi, but it's a healthy concern rather than crippling anxiety. He travels the galaxy, seeking out Force-sensitive individuals not to sequester them in a temple from childhood, but to offer them training and community if they choose it. He studies ancient Force traditions beyond just Jedi and Sith, incorporating wisdom from the Wills, the Night Sisters, the Falanasi, and other Force-using cultures into a more comprehensive understanding of the cosmic Force and the living Force. Luke even perhaps finds personal happiness. In the original timeline, Luke's personal life remained largely unexplored, though hints suggested a solitary existence dedicated entirely to the Jedi. In this alternate reality, with less pressure and trauma, Luke might form romantic connections, possibly even marry and have children of his own. Whether he does or not, he certainly maintains close connections with his family. He's present for Ben's development, a mentor and friend, rather than a haunted figure his nephew barely knows. He visits Han and Leia regularly, and despite Han's continued irreverence toward Jedi mysticism, their friendship remains strong. Luke becomes a respected figure throughout the New Republic, called upon not just for threats requiring Jedi intervention, but also as a counselor and wise voice in important galactic matters. He occasionally advises the Senate on matters of history and philosophy. He's interviewed for documentaries and educational programs. He writes, sharing his experiences and thoughts on the Force, on redemption, on the nature of good and evil. Luke Skywalker becomes what he deserves to be, a legend who lives up to the myth, a hero whose story has a happy continuation rather than a tragic ending. Now we come to perhaps the most profound change in this alternate timeline. Rey, the scavenger from Jakku whose raw Force power and mysterious heritage drove the sequel trilogy's narrative, simply doesn't have the same story in a timeline without the First Order. In fact, Rey's entire character arc as we know it wouldn't happen at all. Let's explore what this means. Rey's awakening to the Force in the original timeline was triggered by several factors: Kylo Ren's Force interrogation, the danger she faced, and the cosmic Force's need for balance against the rising darkness of the First Order. In a timeline where the First Order never exists and the Jedi Order is actively flourishing under Luke Skywalker, these triggers don't occur. Rey would remain on Jakku, eking out a living as a scavenger, waiting for a family that's never coming back. Without Poe Dameron's mission to find Luke Skywalker, without BB-8 carrying the map, without Finn's defection from the First Order, Rey never leaves Jakku. She never meets these people who would become her found family. She never discovers the Force flowing through her. She never learns that she's the granddaughter of Palpatine. She simply continues her hardscrabble existence day after day, trading scrap for portions, waiting for a return that will never come. This is actually one of the darker implications of this alternate timeline. Rey's suffering continues indefinitely. She's strong, resourceful, and capable, so she survives. But that's all it is, survival, not living. The loneliness that defined her childhood continues into adulthood. Eventually, perhaps, she gives up waiting. Maybe she uses her accumulated resources to buy passage off Jakku to seek a new life elsewhere in the galaxy. She might become a pilot, a mechanic, a freight hauler. She'd still be capable and clever, but her potential would remain untapped. The galaxy would never know what it lost because it would never know she existed. However, there's another possibility. Luke Skywalker and his Jedi, in their travels seeking Force-sensitive individuals, might eventually detect Rey's presence. The Force is strong with her after all, perhaps the strongest Force potential in a generation. If Luke or one of his students came to Jakku and sensed her power, they would certainly investigate and offer her training. This would give Rey a path to becoming a Jedi, but it would be a completely different journey. She'd be older when starting training, possibly in her late teens or early 20s, rather than the early 20s of the original timeline. She'd train in a proper academy setting with other students rather than learning in isolation with ancient texts and brief mentorship from a reluctant Luke. Rey's training would be slower, more methodical, following established curricula rather than the desperate, rushed awakening forced by war. She'd learn control before power, philosophy before combat. She'd be one student among many rather than the sole hope of a dying light. It would be healthier for her, certainly, providing structure and community rather than the crushing responsibility of carrying the entire resistance to darkness on her shoulders. But something would be lost too. The fire that forged Rey in the original timeline, the desperate circumstances that forced her to grow so quickly, wouldn't exist. She'd be competent, well-trained, but perhaps not the blazing force of nature that she became when fighting against Kylo Ren and the First Order. And what of her Palpatine heritage? In the original timeline, Rey's grandfather's survival and his machinations were intertwined with the First Order and with Snoke, who was revealed to be a puppet of the Sith Lord. In this alternate timeline, we must address a crucial question. Does Palpatine still survive? Did he still transfer his essence to a cloned body on Exegol before his death at Endor? If so, what are his plans without the First Order to use as a tool? Let's assume that Palpatine's contingency plans partially succeeded. He survives in some form on Exegol, surrounded by his Sith Eternal cultists, his fleet of Star Destroyers being built in secret. But without Snoke to manipulate galactic events, without the First Order to destabilize the New Republic, his plans cannot proceed. Palpatine in this timeline is trapped. He's alive, yes, but barely, clinging to existence in a decaying clone body, unable to restore himself without the resources and chaos that the First Order would have provided. His cultists work tirelessly on Exegol, but they're isolated, cut off from the wider galaxy, unable to openly gather the materials and personnel needed for his grand return. Years pass, then decades, and the Sith Lord finds himself in a race against time, his body deteriorating, his power waning, while the galaxy he once ruled grows ever more peaceful and stable. It's a kind of prison, and perhaps a fitting fate. The Emperor, who sought to rule forever, who refused to accept death, instead experiences an extended tormented half-life, aware of the galaxy's happiness, but unable to touch it. In this scenario, Rey never learns of her heritage because Palpatine never has the opportunity to reveal himself or to use her as part of his plans. She lives and dies, if she ever becomes a Jedi at all, never knowing that she's the granddaughter of the most evil being in galactic history. Is this better or worse? In one sense, it's a mercy. She's not burdened by that dark legacy, not forced to struggle with the fear that she might share her grandfather's capacity for evil. But in another sense, it's a loss. Rey's journey to accept her heritage while choosing to define herself by her actions rather than her blood was a powerful arc. Without that struggle, without that ultimate choice to be Rey Skywalker, not by blood but by choice indeed, something meaningful is lost. Finn's story might represent the most dramatically altered life in this alternate timeline. In the original timeline, Finn was FN 2187, a stormtrooper kidnapped as a child and brainwashed into serving the First Order. His moral awakening during his first combat mission, his decision to defect, his desperate escape with Poe Dameron, and his journey from coward to hero defined his character. But in a timeline where the First Order never exists, Finn is never kidnapped. He's never brainwashed. He's never made to suffer the psychological trauma of being a child soldier. On the surface, this seems unambiguously positive. But let's think about what it means. Finn's family, whoever they were, gets to keep their child. He grows up in whatever community he was born into, probably somewhere in the galaxy that the First Order raided in the original timeline. His childhood, while perhaps not easy depending on the economic circumstances of his homeworld, is normal. He has a name from birth, not a designation. He has parents, siblings perhaps, friends, a childhood. He's not subjected to brutal conditioning designed to strip away his empathy and individuality. He doesn't have to kill or watch his friends die. In every measurable way, this version of Finn's life is dramatically better than what he endured in the original timeline. But here's the complicated part. In the original timeline, Finn became a hero. He overcame his conditioning, found his courage, and made a difference in galactic history. He found purpose, friendship, love, and meaning through his struggle against the First Order. In this alternate timeline, Finn probably lives a quiet, ordinary life. He might be a mechanic, a farmer, a pilot for a cargo company, a merchant, who knows. He'd be happy, or at least content, in the way that most people in a peaceful galaxy are happy. But he wouldn't be special. He wouldn't be the Finn we know, the man who inspired an army and helped defeat the First Order. Is an extraordinary life of purpose born from suffering better than an ordinary life of contentment without trauma? There's no easy answer. It's even possible that in this timeline, Finn never meets Rey or Poe, the people who would have become his closest friends and found family. The bonds forged in combat and shared struggle, some of the most powerful human connections possible, simply don't form. Finn has other friends from his community, people he grew up with or works with, and those friendships are real and meaningful. But they're not the same as the brotherhood he would have formed with Poe or the deep connection he would have developed with Rey. Again, is it better to have loved deeply through shared trauma, or to have normal, healthy relationships without that crucible? Different people would answer differently. Poe Dameron's life in this alternate timeline follows a similar pattern to Finn's, objectively better in terms of suffering avoided, but less extraordinary, less heroic. In the original timeline, Poe was the Resistance's best pilot, a charismatic leader who inspired loyalty and hope even in the darkest hours. He made costly mistakes, grappled with the weight of command, and grew from a hotshot pilot into a genuine leader worthy of eventually commanding the Resistance forces. His courage and skill saved the Resistance repeatedly, and his friendship with Finn and Rey was central to their shared story. In this alternate timeline, Poe still becomes a pilot. That seems inevitable given his upbringing and natural talents. His parents were both rebel fighters, and that legacy would still influence him. But instead of joining a desperate Resistance fighting against impossible odds, Poe joins the New Republic Defense Fleet. It's a professional military career, respectable and even prestigious, but fundamentally different from being a Resistance fighter. He flies patrols, participates in exercises, maybe responds to pirate activity or helps with disaster relief. He's good at his job, perhaps even exceptional. He might rise through the ranks to command his own squadron or even larger formations. But Poe never has to make the desperate, death-defying runs that defined him in the original timeline. He never leads the attack on Starkiller Base's Oscillator, never survives interrogation by Kylo Ren, never has to learn the hard lessons about when to follow orders and when to trust his instincts by getting people killed through his recklessness. He's a good man and a skilled pilot, but not a legend. He probably has a more stable personal life, maintains better relationships, experiences less trauma. He might marry, have children, retire after a successful career to instruct new pilots or write his memoirs. It's a good life, a full life, just not an extraordinary one. The absence of the sequel trilogy's central conflict means its heroes never meet, never bond, never become the family they were to each other. Rey, Finn, and Poe, three people from vastly different backgrounds whose lives were fundamentally shaped by the First Order's existence, simply live separate, ordinary lives. They're happier individually, probably, but the galaxy loses something in their ordinariness. There's a philosophical question buried here. Does the galaxy need heroes? Do we celebrate the heroism that emerges from crisis, while ignoring the fundamental tragedy that crisis was necessary in the first place? Would it be better to live in a galaxy with no heroes because no heroes were needed? Let's shift our focus to the galactic political landscape in this alternate timeline. The New Republic, without the existential threat of the First Order and the catastrophic destruction of the Hosnian system, follows a completely different trajectory. In the original timeline, the New Republic's story was tragically brief. Formed in the aftermath of the Empire's defeat, it struggled for legitimacy and unity for about 30 years before being effectively decapitated by Starkiller Base. The Senate, the central government, and much of the military were destroyed in an instant, leaving the galaxy leaderless and vulnerable to First Order conquest. The New Republic's failure to take the First Order threat seriously, to maintain adequate military readiness, led directly to its downfall. In our alternate timeline, the New Republic gets something that governments rarely receive: time. Decades of relative peace to establish institutions, to develop effective governance structures, to integrate former imperial worlds and build true galactic unity. It's not a perfect process. The New Republic faces significant challenges even without the First Order. The galaxy is enormous and diverse, with thousands of member worlds holding vastly different cultures, economic systems, and political values. Finding consensus among such diversity is extraordinarily difficult. The New Republic must deal with corruption. After the moral clarity of the rebellion, where people fought and died for freedom against obvious tyranny, the transition to peacetime governance reveals all the messy complexity of actual democracy. Special interests lobby for favorable legislation. Senators accumulate power and wealth. Corporations exploit regulatory gaps. Core worlds and outer rim worlds clash over resource allocation and representation. It's frustrating, often disappointing, but it's also normal. This is what democracy looks like, warts and all, and it's infinitely preferable to the alternative. One of the New Republic's major challenges is what to do with former imperial worlds and citizens. At the end of the Galactic Civil War, trillions of people had lived under imperial rule, and many had actively supported or served the Empire. Not all of them were evil. Many were ordinary people who went along with the system, who convinced themselves the Empire brought order and stability, who had families to feed and bills to pay. After the Empire's fall, these populations didn't simply disappear. The New Republic must integrate them, and this process is complicated and contentious. Some former imperial worlds embrace the New Republic, eager for the freedoms and opportunities democracy provides. Others remain resentful, nostalgic for the stability the Empire provided, viewing the New Republic as weak and disorganized. There are regions where imperial loyalist sentiment runs strong, where the statues of Palpatine are taken down reluctantly, where the old anthems are still hummed quietly. The New Republic must balance justice for imperial crimes with the practical necessity of reconciliation. War crimes trials proceed, but they can't prosecute millions of minor functionaries and low-level officers. There's a truth and reconciliation process, controversial and imperfect, that tries to address the past while building toward the future. The New Republic also faces the question of military readiness. In the original timeline, the New Republic's decision to largely demilitarize, to trust in peace and focus on economic development rather than maintaining a strong defense force, proved catastrophic when the First Order emerged. In our alternate timeline, without that obvious threat, the same debates occur. Doves argue that maintaining a large military is expensive and sends the wrong message, that it risks sliding back toward militarism. Hawks, including Leia, argue that the galaxy remains dangerous, that pirate groups, slavers, and potential threats require a capable defense force. It's a fundamental tension in any post-war society. How much security is enough without becoming the thing you fought against? The compromise that emerges is probably a middle path. The New Republic maintains a professional defense fleet, smaller than the Empire's military, but more capable than the skeleton force of the original timeline. Individual member worlds are allowed their own defense forces, though there are restrictions on capital ships and superweapons. There's investment in intelligence services to identify threats before they metastasize. The Jedi, though not a military force, provide an additional layer of security, investigating dark side threats and helping mediate conflicts before they escalate to violence. It's not perfect, and there are certainly incidents: pirate raids, criminal organizations, occasional small conflicts, but nothing approaching the galactic-scale warfare of the Clone Wars or Galactic Civil War. Economically, the New Republic era in this timeline is one of general prosperity. The destructive total warfare that characterized the Clone Wars and the Galactic Civil War finally ends, allowing for reconstruction and development. Trade routes that were disrupted by conflict reopen. Entire sectors that were devastated receive investment for rebuilding. The Outer Rim, long neglected under the Empire and even under the Old Republic, receives particular attention as the New Republic attempts to address the inequality and neglect that fed resentment and instability. This doesn't mean everyone prospers equally. The core worlds, with their head start in development and their political influence, continue to dominate economically. Corporate interests remain powerful, and the galaxy still has vast inequality. But the trend line is positive. Living standards rise, particularly in previously impoverished regions. Access to education and healthcare expands. New technologies spread more widely without the Empire's restrictions on information and innovation. It's not a utopia. There's still poverty, still crime, still social problems, but things are generally getting better, and most people have hope that their children's lives will be better than their own. Culturally, the New Republic era sees an explosion of artistic and intellectual freedom. Under the Empire, censorship was pervasive. Certain forms of music were banned. Historical records were altered or destroyed. Artistic expression that questioned authority was crushed. Education was restricted and propagandistic. The Holonet was heavily monitored and controlled. After the Empire's fall, all of this ends. There's a cultural renaissance as artists, scholars, and creators explore ideas and forms of expression that were forbidden for a generation. This freedom also means the marketplace of ideas includes some ugly voices. Pro-imperial propaganda, though discredited, finds audiences among those nostalgic for authoritarian certainty. Fringe political movements gain platforms. Conspiracy theories spread. The New Republic, committed to freedom of expression, must navigate the tension between protecting democracy and allowing anti-democratic voices to speak. It's messy and uncomfortable, but most agree it's better than the alternative of thought control. The New Republic's relationship with the Jedi in this timeline is significantly healthier than the Jedi Order's relationship with the Old Republic. Learning from history, Luke establishes the new Jedi Order as separate from but cooperative with the government. Jedi are not generals commanding clone armies, not diplomats bound to carry out political objectives. Instead, they're independent guardians who assist the Republic when asked, but maintain their own mission and judgment. They investigate dark side threats, recover dangerous artifacts, help mediate conflicts, and train new Jedi. The New Republic respects their role and provides some support, but the Jedi remain autonomous. This arrangement works better for everyone. The Jedi aren't corrupted by political entanglement or military command. The New Republic benefits from the Jedi's unique capabilities without becoming dependent on them or viewing them as a threat. Individual Jedi might serve in government, in the military, or in other roles, but they do so as individuals making personal choices, not as part of an organizational mandate. It's a more balanced, more sustainable relationship than either the Old Republic's integration of the Jedi or the Empire's persecution of them. Ben Solo, in his role as a senior Jedi Knight by this timeline's equivalent of the sequel trilogy era, serves as a crucial bridge between the Jedi and the wider galaxy. His family connections give him unique credibility with both Force sensitives and normal citizens. He's not seen as some mysterious, detached mystic, but as Han and Leia's son, someone with roots in the wider community. This helps demystify the Jedi, makes them more accessible and less intimidating to the general population. Ben gives lectures, writes articles, participates in educational programs about the Force and Jedi history. He's almost a public intellectual, someone who helps the galaxy process and understand the role of Force users in society. What about the criminal underworld in this alternate timeline? In the original timeline, the First Order's conquest and the chaos of war created opportunities for criminal organizations. The galaxy's instability was good for business if your business was smuggling, slavery, or weapons trafficking. But in our peaceful timeline, the criminal underworld faces a more challenging environment. A stable New Republic with functioning law enforcement makes large-scale criminal operations more difficult. However, criminals are nothing if not adaptable. The Hutt cartel, always resilient, transitions some of its operations to more legitimate enterprises while maintaining criminal activities in regions with weaker New Republic presence. They're still involved in spice trafficking, illegal gambling, and extortion, but they also run legitimate shipping companies, entertainment venues, and other businesses. They're a persistent problem, but a manageable one rather than an existential threat. The Crimson Dawn, Maul's crime syndicate from the Clone Wars era, might persist in some form or might have been dismantled by this point. If it still exists, it's significantly weakened without the chaos of galactic war to exploit. Smaller criminal organizations operate throughout the galaxy, filling various illicit niches. Cybercriminals hacking corporate databases, smugglers moving restricted goods, chop shops dealing in stolen ship parts, pirate groups raiding isolated convoys. It's endemic low-level crime rather than organized warfare. Slavery, one of the galaxy's most persistent evils, remains a target for New Republic action. The Zagarian slavers and other slaving organizations are officially illegal throughout New Republic space, and there are active efforts to eliminate the practice and free enslaved populations. But slavery persists in regions beyond New Republic jurisdiction or in systems where local enforcement is lax or corrupt. It's a long, frustrating fight against an institution with deep cultural roots in some societies. But the trajectory is toward elimination, and thousands of beings are freed who would have remained enslaved in a less stable timeline. Now we must address one of the most significant questions in this alternate timeline. What happens with Palpatine on Exegol? We've touched on this briefly, but let's explore it more fully. In the original timeline, Palpatine's survival and eventual return was intertwined with Snoke and the First Order. The exact nature of Snoke's creation and his relationship to Palpatine was never entirely clear in the films, but the implication was that Snoke was either a puppet or a failed clone or creation of Palpatine, used to manipulate events and eventually bring about the Emperor's return. Palpatine's plan involved using the First Order to destabilize the galaxy, to destroy the Jedi before they could fully return, to eliminate the Skywalker bloodline except for Ben Solo, who he intended to corrupt and use as a vessel. When Rey appeared, powerful and conveniently his granddaughter, his plan adapted to either kill her or turn her, using her as a vessel for all the Sith spirits to transfer into. It was a complicated plan with a lot of moving parts, and it ultimately failed, but it came very close to succeeding. In our alternate timeline, with no First Order and no corrupted Ben Solo, Palpatine's plan falls apart before it can even really begin. He's trapped on Exegol, sustained by Sith alchemy and machinery, but his power is limited. The Sith eternal cultists work to build his final armada, but without the resources and cover that the First Order provided, progress is agonizingly slow. Palpatine, forced into patience by circumstances, waits and plots, trying to find alternative ways to announce his return and reclaim the galaxy. Perhaps he sends out agents, secret Sith loyalists, to infiltrate the New Republic, to foment discord, to gather resources, but without a massive military organization to command, these efforts are limited in their impact. Perhaps he reaches out through the dark side, trying to find and corrupt someone powerful enough to serve as his champion or vessel. But Luke Skywalker's Jedi Order is actively watching for such threats, investigating dark side disturbances, protecting Force sensitives from corruption. Any attempt to create another Darth Vader is likely to be detected and stopped. The most likely outcome is that Palpatine simply fails. His body continues to deteriorate despite the best efforts of his cultists and their arcane science. The clone bodies they create don't last, rejecting his spirit or decaying too quickly. Without the chaos and distraction of galactic war, New Republic intelligence or the Jedi eventually detect something wrong on Exegol. Perhaps Luke and Ben Solo lead an expedition to investigate, bringing New Republic forces with them. They discover the Emperor's hiding place, his fleet under construction, his desperate bid for immortality and return. The final confrontation would be very different from Rey's battle in the original timeline. Palpatine would be weaker, more desperate, his plans in ruins. Luke Skywalker, at the height of his power, together with his nephew Ben Solo and possibly other Jedi, would face the Sith Lord. It wouldn't be easy. Palpatine is still incredibly dangerous, still possesses knowledge of Sith alchemy and dark side powers that even the Skywalkers don't fully understand. But the outcome would be far more certain than Rey's desperate last stand. In this scenario, Palpatine would finally, truly die. The Sith would end not with all of them transferring into Rey in a moment of desperate sacrifice, but with the last Dark Lord falling to a unified Jedi Order backed by the strength of a stable Republic. His fleet of Star Destroyers would be captured or destroyed before completion. His cultists would be arrested or scattered. The threat he represented, The possibility of the Sith's return would be eliminated comprehensively rather than barely, desperately averted. This represents a healing for the galaxy that's more complete than in the original timeline. The Empire's remnants are scattered and powerless. The Sith are gone. The Jedi have returned. Democracy has been re-established and strengthened. It's not perfect. Nothing in the real world or in realistic science fiction ever is, but it's as close to a happy ending as galactic history ever gets. The traumas of the Clone Wars and the Galactic Civil War can finally begin to fade into memory rather than being refreshed by new conflict. But let's consider some of the potential downsides or complications of this alternate timeline. Is it possible for a galaxy to be too peaceful, too complacent? Human nature, and presumably the nature of most sentient species, includes a tendency to take peace for granted, to assume that the current stable state will continue indefinitely. The New Republic, after decades of peace, might begin to let its guard down. Military readiness might decline as budget-conscious senators argue that defense spending is wasteful. Intelligence services might be scaled back. The hard-learned lessons about the dangers of authoritarianism might fade as younger generations grow up never experiencing tyranny. This is a very real concern. The generation that fought the Empire, that remembers the horrors of living under tyranny, will eventually age and pass on. Their children and grandchildren might view stories about the Empire the way we view historical conflicts, important to learn about, but distant, not personally relevant. When Leia warns about the dangers of authoritarianism, will younger senators roll their eyes at the old warrior still fighting yesterday's battles? When Luke teaches about the seductive nature of the dark side, will his younger students view it as abstract philosophy rather than urgent practical concern? There's also the question of what people do with their lives in a galaxy at peace. The rebellion gave millions of people a sense of purpose, a cause worth fighting and dying for. After victory, many veterans struggled to find meaning in civilian life. The same would be true in this timeline, but more so, because the peace lasts longer, becomes more entrenched. What do you do with your life when you're a warrior in a world that doesn't need warriors? How do you find purpose when the great conflict is over, and what remains is just the slow, bureaucratic work of maintaining a functioning society? Some would adapt well, finding fulfillment in building rather than fighting, in raising families, in pursuing personal interests and careers. Others would struggle, feeling adrift, nostalgic for the clarity and intensity of wartime despite its horrors. Some might even, perversely, seek out or create conflict because they don't know how to live without it. There would likely be an uptick in mercenary work, in people joining private security companies or taking risky jobs in dangerous regions, seeking the adrenaline and purpose they lost when peace broke out. The lack of a major galactic conflict might also mean that individuals don't reach their full potential. We've discussed this with Finn, Rey, and Poe specifically, but it applies more broadly. Crisis forces growth. Desperate circumstances push people to discover capabilities they didn't know they had, to become more than they thought they could be. In a comfortable, peaceful galaxy, many people might live good lives without ever discovering what they're truly capable of. Is that a loss? Or is it a worthwhile trade, accepting that we'll never know what we might have been if tested because we're fortunate enough not to be tested? There's also the question of technological and medical advancement. Historically, warfare has driven innovation. The technologies developed for military purposes often have civilian applications that benefit society broadly. In a galaxy without the First Order's threat pushing military, medical science in particular might advance more steadily without war. Resources that would have gone to treating combat injuries and developing military applications can instead focus on curing diseases, extending lifespans, improving mental health treatment. The trauma of war affects not just those who fight, but entire societies for generations. In a timeline with sustained peace, mental health probably improves across the board as the collective trauma of the Clone Wars and Galactic Civil War finally fades. One interesting question is how different species and cultures within the New Republic develop in this timeline. The galaxy contains countless different species, each with their own biology, culture, and history. Under the Empire, there was enforced homogeneity, a push toward a human-centric, authoritarian monoculture that suppressed diversity. The New Republic explicitly rejects this, celebrating diversity and local autonomy, but this creates its own challenges. How do you maintain galactic unity while respecting the vast differences between member worlds? Some species, like the Wookiees, enslaved and oppressed under the Empire, experience a renaissance in this timeline. Kashyyyk rebuilds, its forests recovering from Imperial exploitation. Wookiee culture, nearly destroyed, is preserved and revitalized. Chewbacca, still with Han but also maintaining strong ties to his homeworld, serves as a bridge between Wookiee society and the wider galaxy. Similar stories play out across the galaxy as oppressed peoples finally have the freedom and resources to rebuild. Other species and cultures might struggle with the transition. Warrior cultures like the Mandalorians, for instance, must find their place in a galaxy that doesn't need mercenaries as much. Some might embrace the change, finding honor in protection rather than conquest, serving as peacekeepers or bodyguards. Others might resist, viewing the peaceful galaxy as soft and decadent, maintaining their martial traditions but growing increasingly disconnected from mainstream society. There would be tension and debate within Mandalorian culture about what it means to be Mandalorian in peacetime. The question of the Force itself in this timeline is fascinating. In the original timeline, the Force maintained a kind of balance through dramatic swings. The Sith extinction at the end of the original trilogy, the rise of Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren, the awakening of Rey, the final defeat of Palpatine. It was a violent balance, achieved through conflict and suffering. In our alternate timeline, the balance is more stable. The Jedi return, but not as the massive Thousand Jedi Order of the Old Republic. They're numerous enough to maintain their traditions and serve the galaxy, but not so numerous that they accumulate political power or become disconnected from ordinary people. The dark side still exists, of course. It's not some external force that can be destroyed, but rather an aspect of the Force itself, reflecting anger, fear, and other negative emotions. Individual Force sensitives will still struggle with temptation, still face the pull of the dark side. But without a Sith Lord actively teaching and spreading dark side knowledge, without a major dark side organization corrupting and recruiting, these struggles remain personal rather than galactic in scope. When someone does fall to the dark side, the Jedi can intervene, trying first to redeem and, if that fails, to stop them before they cause widespread harm. Luke's teaching on the dark side is probably more nuanced than the old Jedi orders. He doesn't teach his students to simply suppress all negative emotion, as the old order did, because he knows from personal experience that this doesn't work. Instead, he teaches acceptance and mindfulness. You will feel anger sometimes. You will experience fear. These are natural emotions, part of being alive. The key is not to let these emotions control you, to acknowledge them without being ruled by them, to choose compassion and wisdom even when you're tempted toward anger and hate. This philosophy produces Jedi who are more balanced, more human, less likely to fall catastrophically the way Anakin did. They're not emotionless monks pretending to have transcended all attachment. They're people who care deeply, who form connections, who experience the full range of feelings, but who have been trained to maintain their center, to not be pulled into darkness by those feelings. It's a healthier approach, though not without its own challenges. Some students might struggle with this balance, might fall despite good teaching. But the overall failure rate is lower than in the old Jedi Order, and the consequences of individual failures are less catastrophic because there's no Sith Lord waiting to exploit and amplify them. Ben Solo's particular journey with the dark side in this timeline is worth examining. He still feels the pull, still hears the whispers of his grandfather's legacy. Vader's actions, his fall and redemption, are part of Ben's family history, something he must grapple with. But instead of being alone with these struggles, manipulated by Snoke and distant from his family, Ben has support. Luke understands, having faced similar temptations. Leia shares her own experiences with sensing the dark side in herself. Han, in his gruff way, reminds Ben that who you are is defined by your choices, not your bloodline. Ben develops techniques for managing his connection to the dark side. He meditates on his grandfather's redemption rather than his fall, drawing inspiration from Anakin's final choice rather than being haunted by Vader's crimes. He's open about his struggles rather than hiding them, seeking counsel from Luke and other Jedi when the whispers grow stronger. He channels his intensity and passion into helping others facing similar battles, becoming an expert in what we might call Jedi psychology or counseling. This helps him as much as it helps others, giving him purpose and perspective. There might be moments when Ben nearly falls, when the temptation grows almost overwhelming. Perhaps during an investigation into a Sith artifact, exposure to dark side energy nearly corrupts him. Perhaps a personal tragedy or moment of anger almost pushes him over the edge. But each time, his support network and his training pull him back. He falls to his knees at the precipice but doesn't jump. Over time, these close calls become less frequent as he grows stronger, wiser, more secure in his identity as a Jedi and as himself. By middle age, Ben Solo has become one of the most respected Jedi Masters in the Order, known particularly for his work with struggling students and his expertise in resisting dark side corruption. The absence of Starkiller Base in this timeline means something else too. Hosnian Prime survives. Billions of people who died in an instant in the original timeline live full lives in this one. Cities that were vaporized continue to exist, their inhabitants going about their daily lives, completely unaware of the alternate timeline where they were all murdered. From their perspective, nothing special happened on that day. The Hosnian system remained the current capital of the New Republic, hosting the Senate and all the bureaucratic machinery of galactic government. The survival of the Senate has cascading effects. Politicians who would have died continue their careers, for better and worse. Some are genuinely committed public servants working to improve the galaxy. Others are corrupt, self-serving, obstacles to progress. But they all get to live, and their continued presence shapes policy and politics in ways that are impossible to predict specifically, but which certainly matter. The institutional knowledge and relationships built up over decades aren't suddenly destroyed, forcing the New Republic to rebuild from scratch. The families of everyone on Hosnian Prime during what would have been the Starkiller attack live completely different lives. Thousands of personal tragedies are averted, children grow up with parents, couples celebrate anniversaries, people retire and meet their grandchildren. All the complex web of relationships and lives that make up a population of billions continues uninterrupted. It's almost impossible to comprehend the cumulative difference this makes, the sheer amount of living that happens in this timeline that was erased in the original. And it's not just Hosnian Prime. Starkiller Base's first shot also destroyed several other planets in the Hosnian system. The total death toll was staggering, comparable to multiple Death Star attacks. All of that death, all of that loss simply doesn't happen in our alternate timeline. The astronomical scale of suffering that the First Order caused is completely prevented. When you add up everyone killed by the First Order across all their operations, the number is probably in the trillions. All those lives preserved, all that potential preserved, represents the most significant concrete benefit of this alternate timeline. The question of memorialization and historical memory in this timeline is interesting. In the original timeline, the First Order's atrocities, particularly the Hosnian Cataclysm, would be remembered and commemorated, the way we remember great tragedies and catastrophes. There would be monuments, days of remembrance, educational programs ensuring that future generations never forget. But in our alternate timeline, there's nothing to memorialize because it never happened. The First Order is a curiosity of history, a might have been that was prevented, a threat that was neutralized before it could truly form. Does the galaxy properly appreciate what it avoided? Probably not. It's human nature to focus on actual problems rather than potential ones that were prevented. Some historians and scholars might write about the Imperial remnants that fled to the unknown regions and what they might have become if not stopped. Intelligence officials who worked to identify and neutralize the threat might know how close the galaxy came to renewed warfare. But for most people, the First Order is just a footnote, a minor historical curiosity, the remnants of the Empire that faded away into nothing. They don't realize they avoided a catastrophe because, from their perspective, there was no catastrophe to avoid. This is probably frustrating for the people who worked to prevent the First Order's rise. Leia, if she was among those warning about the threat early, might find it bittersweet that her warnings led to action that prevented the disaster, but also meant that no one really believes the disaster would have happened. It's the curse of successful prevention. The very success makes the prevented problem seem hypothetical and exaggerated in hindsight. But that's a small price to pay for billions of lives saved and a galaxy at peace. The cultural impact of this alternate timeline would be profound. The sequel trilogy, in our reality, added to Star Wars mythology, creating new symbols and stories that became part of the cultural fabric. Kylo Ren's mask, the aesthetic of the First Order, the character dynamics between Rey, Finn, and Poe, all of this became part of how we think about Star Wars. In the timeline of the galaxy far, far away itself, there would be parallel impacts. The First Order's imagery and the desperate struggle against them would have shaped a generation's understanding of conflict. sacrifice, and heroism in the original timeline. In our alternate timeline, the cultural narratives are completely different. The dominant story is not about desperate resistance against overwhelming evil, but about rebuilding after victory, about the hard work of maintaining peace and democracy, about the less dramatic but equally important challenges of good governance and social progress. The heroes are not warriors but lawmakers, diplomats, teachers, community organizers, and all the unglamorous roles that make society function. This might produce a culture that's less militaristic, less focused on individual heroism and more on collective effort. The stories told, the entertainment produced, the values transmitted to younger generations, all of this would reflect the reality of sustained peace rather than constant war. Some might find this less exciting, less inspiring. There's something undeniably compelling about stories of heroic resistance against tyranny, about dramatic last stands and unlikely victories. But there's also value in normalizing peace, in creating cultural narratives that celebrate the difficult work of maintaining functional societies rather than only celebrating the warriors who fight to create them. The generational divide in this timeline would be stark. The generation that fought in the Galactic Civil War, that remembers the Empire's tyranny, remains vigilant and perhaps somewhat paranoid about any sign of authoritarianism returning. They teach their children and grandchildren about the dangers they faced, about the importance of democracy and freedom, about the price that was paid. But those younger generations, growing up in peace, might struggle to truly internalize these lessons. It's hard to really understand oppression when you've never experienced it, to appreciate freedom when you've never lived without it. This is a natural and probably inevitable tension, and it's not unique to this timeline or to the Star Wars galaxy. Every post-war generation faces similar challenges. The key is finding ways to preserve institutional and cultural memory without being trapped in the past, to learn from history without being paralyzed by it. The New Republic must walk this tightrope, maintaining readiness for potential threats without seeing threats everywhere, remembering the past without being consumed by it. Education becomes crucial in this timeline. The New Republic must teach its citizens, especially its young, about the Empire, about the rebellion, about why democracy and freedom matter in a way that feels relevant and engaging rather than like dusty history. This probably means incorporating veterans into educational programs, preserving first-hand accounts, creating immersive historical experiences, and constantly updating the curriculum to remain relevant to contemporary concerns. It's challenging but necessary work. The role of the media in this timeline would be fascinating. In the original timeline, under the Empire and then during the First Order's rise, the Holonet and other media were heavily controlled, used as propaganda tools. The New Republic's commitment to freedom of expression means the media landscape is much more open and diverse, but also chaotic and sometimes problematic. There would be news organizations ranging from responsible, fact-based journalism to sensationalist entertainment to outright propaganda outlets pushing various agendas. This creates challenges for the New Republic. How do you protect freedom of expression while also ensuring that citizens have access to accurate information? How do you prevent media monopolies from forming without government censorship? How do you deal with deliberate disinformation campaigns? These are questions that democratic societies throughout history have grappled with, and the New Republic would face them as well. There wouldn't be easy answers, just imperfect solutions and ongoing debates about where to draw various lines. One technology question worth considering: does the galaxy's technology advance differently in this peaceful timeline? In the original timeline, the race between the Resistance and First Order drove certain innovations. The First Order's development of miniaturized Death Star technology and Star Destroyers, the hyperspace tracking technology, the Resistance's various desperate improvisations, all of this pushed technical boundaries. In our timeline, without that pressure, does technology advance more slowly or just in different directions? The answer is probably that overall progress continues at roughly the same pace, but the priorities are different. Instead of weapons development, there's more focus on civilian applications. Hyperspace travel becomes more efficient and accessible. Communication technology improves. Medical devices advance. Quality of life improvements for ordinary citizens rather than military capabilities. There are probably some military advances too, as the New Republic maintains its defense capabilities, but it's not the primary driver of innovation the way warfare has historically been. The specific question of hyperspace tracking technology is interesting. In the original timeline, the First Order developed the ability to track ships through hyperspace, a major technological breakthrough with enormous military implications. In our peaceful timeline, this technology might be developed anyway for civilian purposes like better traffic control and emergency response, but the research wouldn't be as heavily funded or fast-tracked. Or maybe it's developed earlier, actually, without the secrecy concerns that military application would require, as civilian researchers openly collaborate on the problem. One element of this alternate timeline that we haven't fully explored is the broader galactic context beyond the New Republic. The New Republic doesn't control the entire galaxy. The Outer Rim territories in particular remain largely independent, with varying degrees of connection to the central government. The Hutts control significant territory. Various other independent governments, corporate holdings, and neutral zones exist. How do these regions develop differently in a timeline without the First Order? In the original timeline, the First Order's conquest created chaos that affected even neutral and independent regions. Trade routes were disrupted, refugee crises spilled across borders, economic instability spread. Criminal organizations exploited the chaos. In our timeline, these independent regions probably experience more stability and prosperity. They still have their own problems: local conflicts, criminal activity, political struggles, but nothing on the scale of what the First Order's conquest created. The Chiss ascendancy in the unknown regions, a powerful and isolationist government, would have a very different experience in this timeline. In the original timeline, they presumably dealt with the First Order building up in their neighborhood, though this wasn't explored much in the films. In our timeline, without the First Order's presence, the unknown regions remain relatively peaceful and the Chiss continue their isolated existence. Perhaps they eventually make more contact with the New Republic, perhaps not. But they're certainly not dealing with a militaristic hostile power-building superweapons in nearby space. The question of Force-sensitive children in this timeline deserves consideration. In the original timeline, the First Order presumably captured or killed Force-sensitive children to prevent them from becoming Jedi, following the Empire's precedent. In our timeline, the Jedi Order actively seeks out Force-sensitive children, but not to forcibly recruit them the way the old Jedi Order did. Instead, they inform the families about their child's abilities and offer training if the family consents. Some families accept, wanting their children to understand and control their abilities. Others decline, preferring to keep their children home, and the Jedi respect this choice. This more voluntary approach means the Jedi Order in this timeline is probably smaller than the old Jedi Order at its height. But the Jedi. Some Force sensitives in this timeline never join the Jedi Order at all, instead learning to use their abilities in other contexts. A Force-sensitive doctor might develop extraordinary diagnostic intuitions. A Force-sensitive pilot might have uncanny reflexes. A Force-sensitive artist might create works of profound emotional impact. These individuals aren't Jedi, don't carry lightsabers or study ancient texts, but they're using the Force in their own ways, integrated into normal life. This was something the old Jedi Order would have discouraged, seeing untrained Force sensitives as dangerous. Luke's new Jedi Order is more accepting, recognizing that the Force is part of the galaxy and not all Force sensitives need to or should become Jedi. As we bring this exploration to a close, let's consider the ultimate question. Is this alternate timeline better? The answer seems obviously yes from a utilitarian perspective. Countless lives are saved. Suffering is dramatically reduced. The galaxy is peaceful and prosperous rather than locked in desperate warfare. Democracy flourishes rather than being crushed by authoritarianism. The Jedi Order is restored. The Skywalker family is whole rather than torn apart by tragedy. In almost every measurable way, this is a better timeline. But there are losses more subtle and philosophical than the concrete benefits. The heroes we know from the sequel trilogy don't exist in this timeline, or exist only as ordinary people living ordinary lives. Rey never discovers her strength and courage, never rises from nothing to become a Jedi. Finn never breaks his programming and finds freedom. Poe never leads desperate battles against impossible odds. The bonds they formed, the family they built together, never happens. Is the galaxy better off with them as ordinary citizens rather than as heroes? In terms of their personal happiness, probably yes, but something valuable is lost. There's also a question about whether struggle and adversity are necessary for growth, both individual and societal. The characters in the sequel trilogy were forged by hardship. Rey's loneliness and poverty made her resilient and resourceful. Finn's experiences as a stormtrooper gave him unique perspective and moral clarity. Poe's losses taught him to be a better leader. Without those crucibles, they would be different people, probably happier but perhaps less remarkable. On a societal level, does the New Republic value its democracy more, having nearly lost it to the First Order? Or does prevention teach the lesson just as effectively? The galaxy in this alternate timeline might also be more fragile than it appears. Having never faced the test of the First Order, having maintained peace through prevention rather than winning it back through desperate struggle, the New Republic might be less resilient if another threat does emerge. The institutional memory of how to fight an existential war is less fresh. The heroes who would have emerged from that conflict don't exist. If some new threat appears, the galaxy might be less prepared to face it, or perhaps this is overthinking it, and successful prevention is simply unambiguously good. Ultimately, this thought experiment reveals something interesting about how we think about conflict and peace. We celebrate the heroes who emerge from crisis, and rightly so, but we perhaps don't celebrate enough the people who prevent crisis in the first place, whose success makes them invisible. In our alternate timeline, whoever identified and helped neutralize the Imperial remnants before they could become the First Order, whoever kept Ben Solo from falling to the dark side, whoever maintained the New Republic's vigilance against threats, these are the true heroes. But history won't remember them the way it would remember Rey, Finn, and Poe, because their success means there's no story to tell. In the end, this alternate timeline where the First Order never existed is a reminder that sometimes the best stories are the ones that don't need to be told, because the catastrophe was prevented. The billions living peaceful, ordinary lives on Hosnian Prime don't know they should be grateful, don't know they escaped annihilation, and that's exactly as it should be. The galaxy doesn't need heroes if it doesn't need saving, and perhaps that's the best possible outcome.